we're on this computer. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. And we return with a recent past guest of mine. We're going to be covering Ireland and much of the criminally overlooked history of Ireland post-colonialism. Again, who better to discuss Irish history after semi-independence from the British colonialists than Eugene McCartan, who is the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Ireland. We'll be discussing Irish history from a post-colonialist and Marxist-Leninist perspective. So let's get straight into it. First off, Eugene, thank you so much for agreeing to come back on the program to talk about your country and its fascinating history.
No problem. Thank you very much for having us.
It's an honor. It's an honor to have you. And now, before we talk about before we talk about how cruel the British were to their colonial subjects, because we talked last time about how it was Ireland, particularly Northern Ireland, was the model of what we call settler colonialism, which the British used brutally in the United States and in Canada, known as Turtle Island, Australia, New Zealand, and you even mentioned Israel and the Zionist brutal apartheid model in historic Palestine, of course, South Africa. But before we talk a little bit about that, the one question I wanted to ask you was now I remembered. Okay, but before we talk a little bit about that, now you are a communist. You are from a Marxist-Leninist tradition, and I assume one who doesn't completely throw Stalin out of the window. So I wanted to ask you, why do you? So I wanted to ask you, why do you feel liberal democracy is not the model for Ireland? Why can't Ireland adopt a nice capitalist liberal democracy model like, say, Luxembourg or Austria or one of those countries? Luxembourg, Austria, or yours truly, Switzerland, where everyone seems to have a very nice bourgeois existence. The working class seems to have a pretty good middle class existence. So why do you reject a liberal democracy? Why can't the Swiss model, the Austrian model, or the Luxembourgish model work in your country, the Republic of Ireland?
Well, the first thing is that all the countries you have mentioned, they're all a product of the uneven development of capitalism. Therefore, some capitalist countries are more developed than others. Some have a different relationship to monopoly capitalism, to imperialism. But what they all have in common, whether it be the Republic of Ireland here, the south of Ireland, or Switzerland, or Luxembourg, or Denmark, Germany, what they all have in common, they are societies based upon exploitation. They are societies which have in the past and continue today to be net beneficiaries of the global uneven development of capitalism, the global uneven economic and social relationships that exist in the world. So therefore, they are beneficiaries of the global imperialist rent and exploitation. So my objection to bourgeois liberal democracy is that it does not end exploitation. It actually facilitates the deepening exploitation of people, of peasants, of working people, of the poor right across the globe. And it's the net beneficiaries of it. And therefore, if we wish to end exploitation and we wish to end the exploitation of one human being by another, if we want to institute real equality, real egalitarianism between women and men, between peoples of all color, of all creeds, of all nationalities, then we have to end this system of exploitation. Bourgeois liberal democracy is a product of long, intense political struggles within the developed capitalist world by the working class itself, fighting for the right to have a voice heard, the right to have a say over certain things within bourgeois society. Nothing in bourgeois liberalism or bourgeois society has ever been given to the working class. It has been won through very, very intense struggle. And where struggle ceases to, how is to be openly engaged in, then we continue life's experience shows us that we lose those rights very quickly. So we are living in a world where monopoly capitalism, imperialism is facing many, many contradictions. Um, it is now faced with a global energy crisis created in part by the sanctions against Russia. But the global energy prices have been rising since 2020, right across 21, now into 22. There's vast profits being made by the global energy corporations. But it's like I would say, one hand of capitalism will actually impose and do things which impacts upon other sections of capitalism. So capitalism itself globally has, over the last 4 or 5 decades, or slightly more, has pursuing a strategy globally of low wages, precarious employment, moving production from the developed capitalist countries to
And low taxes that benefit the poorer
yes.
class,
So
right?
you end up with a situation where you have workers who are experiencing precarious employment, precarious housing, precarious shelter, precarious health, and very precarious wages. And it's predicated on basically the ability of the imperialism to deliver a cheap food policy, which impacted right across, which led to the destruction of localized food production in Africa and Central America and other places. And now a situation that it's not able to sustain the cheap food policy, at the same time suppressing wages in terms of conditions. So we're reaching a big point of contradiction that that workers can produce goods, but they're not able to consume them, and therefore there's a surplus of goods. There's a surplus of. It's not a shortage of oil. There's a whole contradictions that are building up within imperialism, which you cannot cope with. And the United States is losing ground economically to China. It's losing ground to economically to India and to many other countries which are following a development model which is to a degree somewhat different from what happened in Europe and North America. There's a lot of foreign direct investment that's flowing into these countries where the monopolies have been chasing cheap labor and then basically shedding jobs in the developed capitalist countries. And so these contradictions are now building up within capitalism. And we're now seeing we're now seeing the results of that in right across Europe, right across North America. There's a huge disillusionment within the working class as to what these parliaments are about, what this is democracy is about, because every time they vote for parties, we seem to get the same policy. So we end up with a situation we have multiple parties. Well, in the United States, you've only got two parties, but they're the same party, just called different names. But in Europe, they've got the same with multiple parties, but we've only got the one economic manifesto. And I think that's so people are beginning to, in a confused way, they're trying to understand the world with bourgeois ideology, bourgeois worldview, and they're having trouble making understand. I'm supposed to live in a democracy, therefore, if I vote for people, they should be doing what I asked them to do, what I voted them to do. But that never happens. So I think there's a growing contradiction within bourgeois democracy itself that is not able to deliver what it promises. It's not able to deliver the people, you vote for us and we will change things. So that illusion that bourgeois democracy can deliver change, I think is beginning to fray at the edges, beginning to break down. And I think that's an important development. I'm not saying that should be sped up towards fascism. No, I think it's something how we address it as serious people. How do we address this question about people's beginning to see the weaknesses, but not necessarily have an alternative? So it's our job then is to present an alternative. What is the alternative form of this? It is about democratic control of the economy. It is about democratic control over the economic, social, political, and cultural life of society. And that's not just about state control, because the army is owned by the state, the police is owned by the state, the court is owned by the state. That doesn't make them democratic, nor does it make them controlled by the people. It's how
Yeah.
do we make the people masters of their own destiny? That is the key question. Rather than servants to capital, how do we make them masters of their destiny? How do they become the vehicle, the real vehicle for social and radical change? That's the challenge facing people.
Then I have then briefly, if you can, then respond to these two follow-up questions of mine, which is why reject the Dutch model of liberal democracy, where there's a lot of egalitarianism. There's when I lived in Holland, I mean, before it went further and further to the right, there seemed to be a lot of class harmony, and it seemed as if people knew that you have to give workers a decent wage. If everyone works hard, we can contribute, and there seemed to be a lot of class harmony as well as very good socially liberal policy. So why reject the Dutch model of a liberal democracy, and why not Ireland, and why not Ireland and other Marxists such as yourself? Why reject also the why do you feel the Nordic model, the Nordic social democratic model, is not sufficient enough to end this ghastly system of capitalism, classism, plutocracy, whatever you want to call it?
See, it's always one of the fallacies presented by liberals and the illusion created by liberal democracy that if you work hard, everybody can get to the top. But that's been the life experience of working people. I don't know when working people have never worked hard. They've always worked hard. They've always worked hard for what they've got. So it's not about working hard and harder, because we know that nothing is produced without the hand of labor. Therefore, all wealth derives from the product of that labor. So all wealth derived in society comes from the hand of labor. Nobody else. A capitalist can't run the factory on his own. It is the workers who turn an object into a use, which has a use value. The surplus created by workers is not owned by them. It is extracted by those who own the means of production. Who already own the capital. So it's the question of whether. So it's not about us workers working harder to get more. It's because we know that working people, many workers die from exhaustion, die from overwork. Never mind anything else. So the liberal democracy in Europe is now under huge pressure. The social democratic model. The social democratic model in Europe, in many ways, was a product of both the existence of the Soviet Union right up until the counter-revolution and the overthrow of Soviet power.
Yeah.
But right from the 1920s onwards, capitalism had to benchmark socialism. I mean, there's no such thing as perfect socialism. That doesn't exist. All societies emerge and develop in the concrete material conditions that exist in the historical traditions of the people that exist. So in Europe, and to a degree, somewhat degree in North America, they had to benchmark themselves off the Soviet Union, and that's where you had in the 1930s the massive rise of the CIO, the whole industrial workers development, the strength of the organized labor movement that forced even bourgeois America to come forward with the New Deal. That was the historical compromise it was prepared to make to get it over the hump of both the big crash of 1930s, but also to placate the working class, to say that that the dream's still alive. You can make it to the top if you just work your ass off and have 10 jobs and work 27 hours a day and don't sleep, don't eat, but just work. You'll make it. You'll get a house somewhere along the line, and your kids might or might not get to college, but at least you will always have the aspiration to get there. And in Europe, that was always a problem. In Europe, social democracy, because it was the front line right up against the socialist bloc, there was a working class were able to extract greater concessions from the ruling class. It also meant that these societies are also net beneficiaries of the global plunder of imperialism of the colonies. So you have then basically a lot of these societies had instituted sort of what they call social partnership or social dialogue, and where workers in factories had to be consulted, and the works councils and all those things. They were a product of the balance of forces that existed in Europe at the time. The balance of forces were on the side of workers insofar as the Soviet Union existed, the Eastern Bloc existed, communist parties themselves were very strong, the workers were very strong after the war because of the role they played in the fight against fascism. But that is all, and over the last number of years, those contradictions have played in because the state itself, because of capital, finding more and more, fewer and fewer avenues for global investment. They have then basically saw that the state within bourgeois society has developed aspects of the economy which they weren't prepared to do, i.e., health services, road infrastructure, education, a whole range of areas where capitalism itself wasn't prepared to go into, but the state developed them. And then the state then basically began to withdraw from those areas of public health, of public housing, public education, public transport, withdrew from them, and then basically to allow space for capitalism, for private capital to move into those areas. So therefore the whole question of the social economy, they called it, is in retreat. And it's also due to the laws of the European Union. The European Union is a treaty based. For all its faults in the United States Constitution or the French Constitution were products of democratic revolutions. Whether all the failures and stuff and shortcomings, what has been constructed in Europe, the construction of the European bloc has been constructed around a series of treaties, not out of any democratic process or any democratic desire. It's about how do they construct an entity called the European Union, which benefits monopoly capital. So that's been done through a process of a number of treaties. And the primacy of the treaties, all of these treaties are all geared about the primacy of the market. That's what the state system treaties, they're all, in other words,
and it explicitly it explicitly says that it's all about strengthening
the primacy of the market. So therefore, it's in many cases United. That's why you find them right across Europe now. There's a huge housing struggle because after the Second World War, the strength of the Soviet Union, there was a lot of social housing built or public housing built, and there was also strong rent controls, strong tenant rights. The European Commission has passed a resolution saying that these are anti-competitive actions. Anti-competitive actions. You can't have rent controls. You can't have all these things about question tenants' rights because that is impinging upon the market to operate in the way a market operates. In other words, the strong will survive and the weak will go to the wall. And therefore, you cannot put a restriction on rents, on controlling rents, because that's anti-competitive. So we have got the same thing here in Ireland. We have the Irish state, it will not build public housing. If it's building public housing, it would have to charge rents that people could afford. So if they're building public housing with the rents that people could afford, then they'd be in direct competition with the private landlords and with the international investor landlords who come in here because there's no rent controls, and therefore they are able to charge exorbitant rent. So people are paying 50, 60, 7% of their income for rent. So if you have public housing based upon the ability to pay, that would be a massive. Why would you want to pay half of your salary or 2/3 of your salary to a private landlord or a corporate landlord, where you could go down to your public housing authority and say, I want a house, please. And they would say, yeah, well, it's going to cost you 10, 15% of your wages. So only someone who's crazy would want to do that, would want to sort of to pay all that amount of money, all their wages, sacrifice their family and everything else, and just basically work to put a shelter over your head. So that's why they don't bring in public housing, because public housing is what they see as an unfair competition against private capital, against private landlords. And so right across the European Union has been pushing this. So that's why the housing question has become such a big issue in Europe, is because they have stripping out the idea of social and public housing that has to be, and rents cannot be controlled because that's not the competition. So these are the issues which are now basically the internal contradictions of capital are dismantling advances made over the last 40, 50 years. So they're dismantling what they call the social economy. They're dismantling it. They're dismantling public housing. They're dismantling public health, and see more and more countries now instituting private health reform, private insurance. So, but there's resistance taking place at different levels in different places. But that's a drive, because basically it's about opening up areas of the economy for private capital to invest.
And isn't and then before we start talking about Irish history and current affairs in Ireland, isn't also even though there's lots to laud about the Nordic model of social democracy, but wasn't because you mentioned that that countries like Austria, Switzerland, and Luxembourg, because they're beneficiaries of the capitalist system, the imperialist system. I guess with their French partners, their German partners, and in case of Switzerland, also their Italian partners. Wasn't that the same thing with the Scandinavian countries? Because a lot of their exploitation, a lot of their wealth, actually, it comes from the dispossession and the dispossession of their indigenous people, the Sami people, right?
Well, they think lots of it's like anything else. Even social democracy is a product, is a victory secured by working people over a long period of time. So therefore, it's something wasn't just given to them. It was, these are the demand made by working people way back from earlier on. I mean, you had Bismarck stole the clothes of the German workers' movement way back at the turn of the late
That's true.
19th century. He stole their clothes, and basically instituted the first elements of what we call a welfare state. So it's something which they've always done to placate the demands of the working class. And a lot of Sweden and stuff like that. Sweden, you remember, is one of the big arms manufacturers of the world. Therefore, a big beneficiary of the global arms race. And the same with a lot of these countries. They're all interconnected. They're all related to the both the militarism of imperialism, the super exploitation globally of imperialism. They all rely upon cheap food policies. The European Union, if a country in Africa or Latin America wants to trade with the European Union, what they institute then is basically what they call a structural adjustment. You must adjust your economy to meet. In other words, if we let you into our economy, you have to let us into yours, and that means then they basically, why the situation in Africa is that the local food, historical food housing production in Africa has been totally dislocated and replaced with the production of food for crops to be shipped to Europe or to North America. That then means then basically the traditional food crops which were consumed locally in the local village or town or region have all been basically pushed aside. That left then basically you have people in Africa now waiting for grain to come from the Ukraine, which was never a case before, never a case, because the whole economy has been dislocated to meet and distorted to meet the needs of monopoly capital globally. So this is the conditions that we find. You cannot separate this. It's not to say that you have to have world revolution, certainly, but an aspect of all this is about the interconnectedness of monopoly capitalism, but also then to self-create the interconnectedness of the working class globally, the interconnectedness of the working class and the rural poor, the peasants in Africa and Latin America. So the oppressed are interconnected by their exploitation.
And before we start talking about Ireland, which model of radical socialism do you think would be the best for Ireland? The Vietnamese model, or the Cuban model, or a mix of both?
All those countries where you mentioned, all of them will tell you there is no model.
Okay.
Each one is struggling to find the way forward and to develop socialist ideas in real concrete material conditions. I know it's very easy for the left to look, because that's what we're told. Many we all come to this Judeo-Christian belief that there's always a solution somewhere, that you have to find it within the book. We pore over the books, looking for quotes, looking for here solutions there. Solutions in themselves is the application of the book. Marxism is both a science and an art. The art is, how do you apply it? How do we actually understand our people? How do we understand the traditions of our people? Where do we understand? How do we build and strengthen the material conditions of the people. And I think then basically from that, if you are in a society or a small country which is rich in oil, that gives you different options. If you have no oil, it gives you a different set of problems. If you've got a society which is rich in food, production of food, or a society which has great problems with the natural conditions of drought and everything else, that gives you a different set of problems. So therefore, it requires a different set of solutions. So I think these are all questions that we can't just sort of say one shoe fits all, because that's what imperialism tells us. That's what imperial tells us. Imperialism tells everybody, you must build your society like ours, unto our likeness. So you do as you're told, and we'll tell you how to build their society, their economic system. Whereas we looking at it, we must understand the history and the traditions and the real concrete conditions of your own society at the given moment in time. And so you have to look at that's how we do it. So it's not about finding a model or this, that, and the other. Because it's like everything. I think was one of the feelings of Eastern Europe was they basically, in many ways, they just modeled themselves upon the Soviet Union, not really taking into account the real their own historical traditions, their own real material conditions of the people there, their history. And I think the Cubans have learned a very difficult lesson where before they had very much taken on board a lot of the Soviet approach to economic development, the application. And I think now that over the last 30 or 40 years, they have been struggling and developing to come forward with their own model to make what they see as socialism in Cuba that works in Cuba. It works in Cuba. What they do say is that what they have learned, the lessons of life they have learned, and I think what impresses an awful lot of people about Cuba in particular is its sheer internationalism, its working class patriotism, and its working class internationalism. That it'll have doctors and nurses from going to all over the world, or will bring in young people to train as doctors and nurses from North America, from the United
Yep.
States, or from Latin America, or from Africa. And so, whatever meager resources it has, it's prepared to share. And I think that's the world in which we should be striving for. That the resources in Africa belong to the African people, but also belong to all of us. The fish in the sea belong to all of us because the fish don't know where the borders are. These are only human beings created these borders. Same with food. And therefore, if people don't have water in Africa, then we have to find the ways means which we can share water. We have to find the ways means which we can share food if we can grow things in certain areas. So I think this is so human socialism is about really reconnecting the human being with each other. It's about reconnecting the human being with nature and re-establishing the principle that all wealth belongs to the people. Natural wealth and everything else belongs to the people, and we can only build a harmonious world if we all work together and share together. And I think that's where capitalism doesn't like it. Capitalism constantly poses you against me against somebody else, men against women, black against white, brown, living a it feeds upon, nurtures in the swamp of division. And that's where we have to, how do we drain the swamp of division created by imperialism? And think so that's what socialism starts about, bringing about that, changing the material conditions that we find ourselves.
That's a perfect segue then to this question. Now, we talked last time about settler colonialism that the British imposed very brutally in your country, Ireland, particularly in the Northern Ireland. So I wanted can you respond to these three aspects of the brutal human rights abuses and the brutal subjugation of the Irish people that the British did? Because now. Now, wasn't it the British that one of their ways of dealing with Irish rebellion was the skinning of people? So when people hear the term Redskins in the U.S. Towards Native Americans, wasn't that model of brutally, brutally like chucking off, people's heads and using, their heads as a pike? Wasn't that in Britain? Yeah, didn't the British use that in Ireland? And then can you talk about how there was so much how there was so much contempt for the Irish poor, the Irish working class, that the prisons were so overpopulated that the British, their solution to that was basically to send not only the Irish working class, but also rebellious British working class Scots and Welsh to Australia and New Zealand as a penal colony. And can you talk about how brutal that was when they would send people to those penal colonies?
Yeah, it's I suppose like everything else, the colonialists, regardless be Africa or wherever else, have an infinite ability to torture and murder. Whether that be the British, the French, the Dutch, the Belgium, US, all those countries have all had an infinite variety of how to punish people, to make them more compliant, to make them more, how you say, subservient. In Ireland, the British did practice some very, very awful things and perpetrated awful things against the people. Particularly that time, it would have been against the large scale peasants and landless people. That was all done through both physical violence and repression, but also through laws. You had what was called here the penal laws or the anti-Catholic laws. The penal laws were about if a Catholic had two cows or two horses, they'd have to sell one of them. This was about preventing the development of any sort of wealth within the Catholic population. It meant also that they became even more subservient to the needs of the landlords. And when the famine came, essentially that
The
was
Great Potato Famine, right?
yeah. Well, here in Ireland, people don't call it a famine; they call it the Gortamor, the Great Hunger. Um, there was food going out by shiploads out of Ireland to Britain. Cattle, corn, all types of things were shipped out of Ireland to Britain. While the people mainly on the west coast, right across Ireland, but a large concentration of the people who died in the famine were along the western seaboard. Most of them were Gaelic speaking, and also then a large section of the people who left the country. A lot of them would have been also Irish speakers. So the famine played a number of roles. It cleared the land of surplus population. It also done huge damage to the, how you say, the cultural integrity through the language and culture of the Irish people, and so left basically the majority of people in English speaking. So it basically fractured a huge cultural part, an important cultural element in any struggle in any people is that a historical cultural um, transmission belt of the experience of the people, and the language, the Irish language, was one of those historical transmission belts to pass on the experience and the culture of the people. So they smashed they smashed the sort of the, how to say, the great foundation of the Irish language. And since then, the language itself has been on retreat and on retreat and on retreat. And the establishment of the government in the Republic has not really added anything to that to stop that retreat. In actual fact, the policies, some people would argue that the policies of the president, of the governments over the last 50 and 60 years have actually speeded up the process of the dislocation of the Irish language. So but the British did institute the anti-Catholic laws, which were then repealed in the early 1900s. Then they instituted, the British were forced to institute a land reform, but what they did through the land reform was that basically they created a large number of small holding farmers. And as they say that they
And
created,
weren't and weren't some of them? I was recently in Glasgow visiting a friend of mine, so I'm wearing the Scottish flag. I do believe in Scottish independence, even though I have my issues with the SNP. But weren't some of the partners in crime to settler colonialism and to that very narrow small class people? Weren't some of them actually Scot? Weren't some of
they
them
were
actually
told, yeah, they
Scots?
were. Scotland suffered the same thing with the Highland clearances. They had to clear the land of people because most of the land was owned either by absentee landlords or Scottish landlords who were connected into the actual the financial system or connected into London one way, or financially benefiting the beneficiaries of of London. And you have to, even now today, Edinburgh is still a huge financial centre. A lot of capital just doesn't flow through the city of London. A lot of capital flows through the city of Edinburgh. So there's a lot of links between the Scottish bourgeoisie and its connections to the English bourgeoisie. So A lot of these things are not as clear cut as some people would like.
Yeah.
But the whole question of if they applied these rules, so they also had to, in some ways, the net beneficiaries, for instance, of the mass, how's the sort of the million or so Irish probably died, and then a couple of million people who left Ireland. The Irish population around that period in time, in the 1850s or before the famine was, the Great Hunger was, in around a region of 8 million people. By the turn of the 20th century, the population in Ireland was little more than 4 million. So half the population had either died or left. So what was the benefit? So basically, a lot of them left and went to the United States. So therefore, they became part and parcel of that expansion of colonial power right across North America, Canada, and then
Victims
also.
of that's fascinating. So victims of settler colonialism in their country,
Mhm.
they become immigrants, but then later assimilate and become part of the white supremacist settler colonial
They're
regime.
part of that, and but even in that again, that they were the Irish Catholic would also been faced by discrimination
Yeah.
from because they were Catholic and untrustworthy, and uh, Irish made them even more untrustworthy because there was always appeared to be a radical anti establishment streak within them, and there's quite a few instances of I mean the Irish took to both sides in the United States in the Civil War. Took both sides. Irish supported the Mexicans and the San Patricio battalion. A battalion of Irish who deserted from the American army and went to fight with the Mexicans. So there's a lot of complexity in all these things. For instance, the Fenian movement, which was a mass agrarian movement, which had connections into the First International and the actual act of Fenians. Someone actually were members of the International Committee of the First International. Um, they helped influence and shape Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels' understanding of oppressed nations. But the Fenians had a huge strategy. They had a strategy whereby they were going to organize an international uprising against British rule and all right across the British colonies. So they assembled an army in America to invade Canada. They had activists involved in the Caribbean and Latin America, and some of them, for instance, some of people like key advisors to Jose Marti in Cuba were Fenian, were Irish. So the Irish there's always been a complexity. There's always been a contradictions and complexity. And there was Irish who fought with the British Army who were basically carried out atrocious atrocities in India. The Amritsar massacre in India was carried out by an Irish officer. So there's always been people who did this, but like everything else, you'd have to. I mean, I'm sure it's the same in African American communities in North America. People, why are you going out to fight in the American uniform when the American state is oppressing us here? You have these are always ongoing debates within people because people are we're trying to find ways forward, and we end up a lot of times we end up falling for the line of division. We end up falling for the line of division, and we have to try to. It's the political consciousness that is important, and how we develop political consciousness within the people. And I think that's where we need to be today. So basically, a lot of things applied, but the British learned. They moved, and they were how do you say they were transferable skills. Now, oppression is a very transferable skill, and so they've transferred. So the Irish were brought in, and the English working people, minor crimes or fighting, looking for food, stealing food, or robbing, or sort of killing an old rabbit here, or hunting an old deer off the landlord's estate. You were sent to what they called Van Diemen's land. You were sent to because basically there was an empty space. There was nobody there. There was only Aboriginals. They weren't really not
Oh
people.
yeah,
They're not
yeah,
really
yeah.
people. They're not people. They're just things that live out there, and they're not really people. So they had to create. So they had to create these people to go there. So you criminalize the poor, and the way to punish them was to send them as far away as possible, and actually to use them. So it ceased to become a problem at home, but actually use them to build their empire. So they use the Irish and the poor of England and Scotland and Wales to build an empire, and part of that was to annihilate the Aboriginal peoples in Australia and to colonize that. And so that's been same thing in Africa. It was they went with the Bible in one hand and a gun in the other. and who was there? Only the foot soldiers. So in order to, in order to be to guarantee the success of imperialism, you had to be an imperialist at home. You had to be an imperialist at home. So therefore, you had to have this great narrative that your role in the world was to bring the benefits of your civilization to these uncivilized people. And you can hear that, you hear it in Biden, and you can hear it in Trump, you can hear all of the leaders of the United States imperialism. Americans' manifest destiny. Our manifest destiny is to bring our values to the whole world. Whether you want them or not, you're going to get them. And if you don't take them voluntarily, then there's a whole lots of different ways we can make you take these values. And so I think that's where that has always been the case. So in order to be imperialist abroad, you need to dehumanize those whom you are oppressing. And the English, the British did that in Ireland. They caricatured the Irish people as being savages, being lazy, being drunk, and all the haven't changed. I am sure all black people in the United States are tired with the same brush. They're all lazy, fickle, living off welfare, drug dealers.
Same thing with same thing with Native Americans, that they're all just drunks, and that what do they have to complain about? They have a casino.
Yeah. So you have to demonize those whom you fear. You demonize those to fear. So therefore, you build a political project based upon fear, not based upon advance and humanity. It's about fear. You fear those people over there, and therefore that makes them. If you're only guided by fear, then it makes you a very, very easy, malleable, pliable individual, because you want to get rid of that fear. So how do you do it? You follow those who say, "I've got a solution to your fear." So if you fear black people, oh, then I'm here. If you fear Native Americans, oh, I'm here. If you fear the people of Africa, the migrants, oh, we can do something about that. So you have to construct this pyramids of fear to keep people under control. So there, as I said, you go back to this whole idea that if you want to be imperialist abroad, international, global, to have a global strategy, you have to present yourself as being on a mission to do something, on a mission to civilize. So you don't say when you're stabbing, when the burglar comes in the front door, doesn't come in and say, I'm here to read your gas meter. They don't go into Africa and say, oh, we're here to rip every resource you have and take it out. Say, no, we're here to facilitate your development. Your development. And that's how they've approached it. That's how imperialism approaches this whole thing in regards to how it creates an imperialist mentality back home within the working class, who believe that the working class then believe that what they have is a product of both their hard work, but also the successful government policies abroad. Because we're getting these resources and food from abroad, therefore the government policies are successful. So you get people to buy into this whole process of globalization, of imperialist trust. And why would all people, poor people in America, white or black or brown or whatever, why the hell do they want to go off fighting in wars everywhere around the world? For what? For what? Because they know damn well they get nothing out of it. So unless you've created the false impression that somehow or another they will be direct beneficiaries of that plunder, of that adventure.
And that's a perfect segue to this question. Let's talk about the Irish revolutionaries. Can you explain briefly, again, if it's even possible, can you explain the political visions of James Connelly, whom many leftists revere, as well as Michael Collins and the first, I believe, either Prime Minister or President of Ireland, Eamon De-Valera. I go to an Irish pub which is named after him here in Brussels. And yeah, so can you talk about those three and much of the Irish Republican revolutionaries, and any from the left, and any women who you think are criminally overlooked and underrated, and that you think people should know about? And then when you talk about them, can you please explain why was Michael Collins killed?
That's if I should knew that I would do the lottery.
Oh, go right ahead. Go right ahead. You know me. I'm a history buff. 1+1.
James Connelly.
We're history buffs here.
James Connelly was his family came from County Monaghan, which is the southern side of now the British border in Ireland. They immigrated, like many others, to Scotland, because a lot of Irish immigrants from that part of the north of the country, from Cavan, Monaghan, Donegal, County Down, all Derry, a lot of them went to Scotland because it was the nearest place to go to. So a lot of them ended up in Scotland to work in the factories or to work on the farms, summer jobs, whatever else. But a large number of them went and lived and settled in Scotland. So James Connelly's family came from Monaghan, and they ended up living in Edinburgh, in a little district which became known as Little Ireland. So that's what he would have grown up in, an atmosphere of Irish immigrants. So therefore, he would have known the songs and stories and the history of the Irish people.
And lots of Gaelic, and probably lots of Gaelic.
Yes, yeah. But also, he would have learned the stories of the famine, of the hardship, and of the exploitation of the Irish people. So that was something which he would have been naturally listening to in conversations at the kitchen table, conversations of men and women sitting in doorways talking about Ireland or whatever else. So he would have known the history of Ireland from that historical transmission of the human word, the human story, of the poem, the book, passing on that whole experience onto one generation to the next. And we shouldn't really ignore this whole question of the historical transmission belt, of how experience is passed on generation to generation, not through big sophisticated ways, but sitting around a table, having a cup of tea or having dinner, and someone explains to them a little bit about history and about their own family. That all builds into stories, into the thought patterns of people and how they understand and see the world, and how they understand themselves in it. And so Connelly would have grown up in that. As well as that, then Connelly would have been involved in the Scottish labour movement, which was one of the most radical advanced sections of the British labour movement. And therefore, he would have come into contact with a lot of the emerging radical working class movement in Scotland. So Connelly then would have began to marry his historical memory of the Irish people, the oppression of the Irish people, the emergence of the radical Scottish labour movement, and the influence of Karl Marx, reading Karl Marx. So then when Connelly...
Hey, sorry to interrupt. So was it safe to say that he was a communist, that he definitely was a Marxist?
He would say himself that Marx was the greatest thinker he'd ever come across. So it's always said, do I have any problems with James Connelly's views? None. So I consider myself a communist. Therefore, I don't have a problem calling James Connelly a communist. He didn't call himself that himself. He called himself a Marxist. I don't have a problem with these things. These are just terms. But his politics, would the Communist Party identify with him? Most certainly. But when Connelly came to Ireland, he came as a British soldier. He came as part of the British Army. Then he met a woman, deserted, and came back and got a job in Dublin. He was offered a job by a Dublin socialist grouping to come to Dublin to set up a political party. So then, when James Connelly came in 1886, he came to not 86, no, in the early 1890s. He came to Dublin. He founded the Irish Socialist Republican Party. It was the first independent working class party in Ireland, and a revolutionary party. From the very beginning, Connelly saw the link between the social and the national question in Ireland. That's because, I say, marrying those two things, the historical memory that he was learned from his own people, the socialist ideas coming from Karl Marx and the Scottish independence labour movement, he married them in his own creative way into this, that we saw as the dialectical relationship between the social and the national and the social, to see what is the class content of the national struggle and what's the national content of the class struggle. And that's where we would look at it, because you cannot separate these things. You can't separate these questions about sovereignty and democracy from social progress, because you're not going to build socialism in a colony, and you're not going to build socialism by being an imperial empire and imposing socialism all over the world. That simply doesn't work, simply won't happen. So you have to really concretize where your struggle is, what are the forces you need to mobilize to win that position, and how do you advance. So Connelly then came to Ireland. He built the first working class party, weak and as it was. He began to really apply his Marxism to Ireland, and through that he wrote a number of little important booklets called Labour in Irish History, The Reconquest of Ireland, and Labour nationality, religion, plus a whole plethora of articles in his newspaper on Irish history. So he left a whole body of work which is extremely important. I think why he has become important now in the international sphere of things is that to a degree, it's only now dropping in some of the left that you cannot separate socialism from democracy and from sovereignty, and what is national independence. And so, what do you learn? What do you say to the Cubans? The Cubans, what do the Cubans say? The Cubans say freedom, sovereignty, socialism, or death. They're important. So Cubans are very, very proud of their sovereignty, very, very proud of their independence. And the Cuban people see, they link socialism with sovereignty and independence. Same thing in Latin America. What are the people fighting for? They're fighting an anti-imperialist position first. They want to be allowed to make their own decisions. And connected to that, if they want to socially transform society, therefore securing national independence and national sovereignty are part and parcel of that battle. So therefore it's become a better understanding of the role of the working class, that as Connelly said, the working class itself must constitute the nation. So
did he live to see Ireland, or at least half of Ireland, become a republic, or was he murdered by the British before that?
James Connelly was executed in 1916 for his part in he was the commander of the Easter Rising. It was known as Easter Rising, or we would call it the revolution in Dublin in 1916. But he was also, James Connelly was also a product of, he went and worked in the United States for a number of years and then come back to Ireland. He was the founder of the first independent trade union movement in Ireland. Before that, trade unions in Ireland were very much linked into the British trade union movement. So he asserted, some key elements he asserted. So he asserted the primacy that the working class must organise itself independently, and it needed his own political voice and needed his own political party. Second of all, he asserted that the working class itself must organise itself independently of the imperial power structures. So therefore, him and Jim Larkin set about establishing the independent Irish trade union movement, not connected to, but in solidarity with the British labour movement, but independent of it. And so therefore he constantly emphasised this point of the independent role of the working class, both in the struggle for national freedom and also in the struggle for socialism, that the working class must play a central role, must be not itself become absorbed into the state. So they were critical elements he came forward with, and he put with the leading role of the working class in that. That if you look at bourgeois American society, Irish society, British society, the interests of the ruling class are perceived to be the interests of the nation.
Yeah.
James Connelly said, yes, that's under their society. Yes, it does. But if we want a different society, we want a more socially just society, we want a more economically egalitarian society, then the working class must constitute the nation, must become the nation itself. In other words, no other class interests are above the working class interests. And not on a power that the primary role of the state, of society, is about creating a conditions or a society where the working class is the power, the class power, the power of the state, the power of the economy, the power of the politics, the power of the military, the power of the culture.
We're getting to most of the questions I wanted to talk to you, so that's really good. But then before we get,
you got to go to Michael Collins. Michael Collins.
Yes. So talk to us about Michael Collins and the first Irish democratically elected leader, Eamon De-Valera, and why was Michael Collins killed?
Shot. Well, how shot him is a very debatable question. Michael Collins was certainly was a charismatic leader. The biggest problem with the national independence movement in Ireland, unlike a lot of the national liberation movements in Africa and in the Far East, there was no strong working class organised force.
Interesting.
The people who controlled the national movement were bourgeois nationalists. Connelly worked with them because he wanted to claim a space. He wanted to position the working class as a powerful force within the national movement. In other words, linking class and the national movement together. So Michael Collins was a charismatic leader, a good military strategist, and but the dominant force, the dominant ideas within the national movement were bourgeois forces. And the Irish Revolution, if you view it on the characterization of a train, the train of national independence of the Irish people has been a long train coming, and it hit a very important juncture in 1916 rising in Dublin. That movement for national independence, that train gathered speed from 1916 up until 1919, 1920 in the War of Independence from the British. So it's gathered speed. But when then we came to the point where the British wanted to talk, there were people then said, well, the British are offering a deal here. Therefore, the train has arrived at the stop where I want to get off. So they wanted, this is where as far as we're prepared to go. This is part of the British are offering us a deal whereby we can maintain our economic trading links with the empire. We will have a degree of autonomy in the sense of the Free State that was established in 1922-23. So therefore, we're getting off the train here, and they done a deal with the British. That led to a situation where a civil war erupted, or we would call here the war to defend the Republic. The Republic was declared, an Irish Republic, sovereign republic was declared in 1916. There was a war of independence to bring it about, and then what they called the Civil War, or the war to defend the Republic, was those forces who said, we're happy with where the train is now. The destiny is where the destiny.
We're happy with we're happy with
where the train has arrived. The train has stopped at this station. We're happy with this station because it gives us power. It maintains our economic relationships with the empire. It gives us a bit more ability to build an Irish capitalist class in relationship to imperialism. But also, the Irish capitalist class were very aware, very, very aware that within the national independence movement, there's a very strong working class, small farmer, rural people element within it. So they knew on their own they could not control the working class. They could not control the rural working class, nor the small farmers. They knew they couldn't control it because they knew they couldn't deliver to them. But the working class, the urban working class, the rural working class, and the small farmers, what they were looking for, they knew they couldn't control. So therefore, what they had to do was make an alliance with British imperialism. And so British imperialism made an alliance with nationalist bourgeois class and also with the unionist bourgeois class. Because the unionists were also concerned, could they really control a very, very militant Catholic nationalist minority, and also a working class which was also suffering great poverty and stuff like that. So both of them said, both of us need to rely upon the British to maintain our own interests. So that's why partition came about. So whenever they went to the delegation went from Ireland to Britain, they Arthur Griffith and others basically wanted Michael Collins there because Michael Collins reflected the armed forces, the armed wing of the national movement, and therefore, if they were going to bring the national movement on board the compromise with the British, therefore Michael Collins would absolutely need to be there. Would absolutely need to be there because if he didn't go,
yeah, go ahead.
If he didn't go, then the whole military structure that existed right across Ireland would then call into question. So he was brought in there to basically to ensure that those involved in military struggle and military actions and the military forces would be in behind this process. And also I think Michael Collins himself was to a degree happy with the situation of what was offered by the British. There was some talk of him saying that partition was only a stepping stone to United Ireland. So what happened?
So is it safe to say, sorry to interrupt then, so is it safe to say that Michael Collins, he was good for what he did, kind of like General Patton. He was great for the militarism, great for the strategy, but when it came to the politics, is it safe to say that he was a traitor to the Irish cause?
Well, I would say he probably took decisions based upon his own political understanding of things. He wasn't a Marxist. He wasn't a working class revolutionary. He was a bourgeois. Say part of a bourgeois movement which was not anti-imperialist, which was not anti-capitalist, unlike the
Hence why they prop him up, and hence why I
yeah,
only hear
it's not
about
like the
James
national
Connelly
liberation movement. It's not like the
when I
national
talk
liberation movement.
Marxists.
Yeah, it's not like the national liberation movement led by the Vietnamese Communist Party in Vietnam or China or in Mozambique or Guinea-Bissau, South Africa, places like that, or even in Latin America. There was the Irish Revolution came at a point in time where the working class had not, to a degree, had not developed its political theory. And that came about with the resulting of that became more crystallized, a more concrete form with the advance of the Russian Revolution and the advance of Bolshevism. Then that the working class ideology, the working class organizations began to take a global force, a global perspective. And Ireland, basically, our revolution in 1916, 1921, came at a point where we were in the working class movement was beginning to build itself globally through the Comintern and other things. So our revolution came at a point where it was going to happen. You can say it shouldn't have happened then, or it should have happened 2 days a week, 2 negatives. You don't know what's going to happen next week. Therefore, you can say, well, we'll hold off next week because I believe better conditions are going to exist next week. You don't. You say you weigh up the balance of forces. There was the British are in deep trouble in Europe, in Flanders and everything else. We also have to stop slaughter Irish people. Tens of thousands of Irish people being slaughtered here for an imperial war. We have to make a blow against that. So you just can't say that, oh, the conditions were right here and they weren't right there. You don't, as James Connelly said, you don't know when a revolution is ready until you've tried. Till you've tried. So in other words, you make an evaluation of the concrete material conditions. You make a political decision based upon evaluation of what you know, and then you make a judgment call. So there's no guarantee that the outcome is going to be exactly as you wanted it. That's not possible. That's simply not possible. That's an anti-materialist. There'd be an anti-Marxist view of that. There'd be an anti-Marxist view. Because what is Marxism is about? A concrete condition, a concrete analysis of a concrete situation. So you can't concrete analyze something next week. You can only concrete analyze based upon the past experience, the current balance of forces, and how we move forward. So I think that's where, and then Michael Collins got caught up in that. And then when the war to defend the Republic broke out, it was known then as the Free State Government of the Republic, the Government of the Republic of Ireland. It was backed up by the guns of the British. The British gave the guns to the Irish government at that time, armed them and trained them, and there's those guns and weapons that suppressed the Republican forces which were opposed to the treaty, opposed to partition. And Michael Collins then basically became comrade fighting comrade, former comrades fighting each other. And in that process, there's always been speculation that Michael Collins was shot by British agents on his side. So like everything else, history we'll never know how he was shot. Was he shot in the back of the head or in the front? Because no one really knows. There was never anything like that. So it's like history is once you remove class and class interests from history, then history becomes a debate about individuals and what role what individuals played or didn't play, and it's nice intrigue, and it gets you can get 40 books around the same topic, dealing with small minuscule elements of history rather than actually the big picture of history, the contending class forces, the shape and change, and the tectonic plates of social and class struggle shaping and twisting and turning as they go along. And De-Valera was the perceived leader of the Republican forces after the treaty. The first president of Ireland was not De-Valera. De-Valera became the leader of Fianna Fáil, and Fianna Fáil got into government in the late 20s.
And Fianna Fáil, and there's another rival oligarchic party called Fine Gael, and they're the worst of both worlds. They're both fiscally conservative and socially conservative.
Well, see, the whole thing that wasn't always the case. Fine Gael came out of what was called colonial. They were the party which supported partition, that were supported by the British, and they were the most Catholic reactionary part of the national movement. And so they held sway in the 1920s. They consolidated partition. They're the ones who give a free hand to the Catholic Church to control schools, education, and all that. So they were a deeply reactionary party. They were also a party.
And also setting up a very patriarchal society. That's where the Mary Magdalene Aslims
Yeah,
come
so
from.
Common Gael coming and basically transmuted into what they call Fine Gael, which is current party. But they were also a party which they flirted with fascism in the 1930s. They're the ones who organized.
Really?
Yeah, they're the ones who organized a movement here in Ireland called the Blue Shirts. The Blue Shirts they mirrored themselves off the brown shirts and black shirts of Germany and Italy. So the
Wow.
Blue Shirts. So then the Blue Shirts actually sent 700 volunteers to fight in Spain against what they saw the crusade against communism. They didn't see much action. They only saw one skirmish, and that was whenever the Italian and fascists attacked them. And as Brendan Behan, the famous Irish writer, said, it was the only army that ever went to war and come back with more men. And so the fascists went out. I wouldn't say all the people who went out or fought were fascists. Certain those leading elements were fascists, but they were basically in the 1930s. They were used to smash trade unions, to smash Republican meetings, communist meetings, to break up tenants organizations, to break in, do a lot of damage to radical forces in Ireland. And then De-Valera came to power in the late 20s, early 30s. They came on the back of an anti-land annuities campaign where they were not going to pay the solution to the land question was that the Irish people would pay ground rents to the landlords in London, and there was a campaign then basically to end that payment of land annuities to landlords. And the Fianna Fáil came in on the back of that, came in on the back of job creation, of building up an economy which would meet the needs of the Irish people. So they come in on a petty bourgeois radical platform, and then.
But this is why. But this is why you're against the concept of a liberal democracy, because a liberal democracy, if we want to look at Ireland, a liberal democracy is a continuation of the very things which it's a continuation of the very things which were why the Irish wanted to set themselves free from British colonialism, right? Because for me, colonialism and imperialism, liberal democracy, plutocracy. For me, that's all just it's all the one percenters and the rich who conserve this classist system,
But
right?
I think no, I do think we need. Well, it does that in a sense, but we do also need that. Fianna Fáil were responding to real material interests, real material forces. That's what you have. That's what they're responding to, real material forces. In other words, for Fianna Fáil to get into government, it had to a degree, accumulate political support. So how did it accumulate political support? By saying the people were hungry, the people were looking for jobs, people wanted housing, people wanted health care. Someone said that we can provide you with that. We can build an indigenous industrial base. We will expand the state into areas that it currently does not go into. So therefore, you could say that Fianna Fáil's petty bourgeois social democratic position was a product of class struggle, not very developed class struggle, but the class struggle nevertheless, because it was work on the urban working class, the rural working class, and small farmers were totally and utterly opposed to the dominance and the rule of the big farmers, of the big bosses, and the big capitalists, and that's what they. So Fianna Fáil captured that petty bourgeois view of the world. It wasn't rally. It wasn't driven by a dominant ideology. It was driven by self-interest. Working people said we need change here. They didn't necessarily have the concrete belief that these would need a radical transformation of society. Fianna Fáil offered them something. So Fianna Fáil's majority at that time was a product of class struggle. Not openly people on the barricades shooting and screaming and shouting, but then at that level. So Fianna Fáil did come into power. It did build state industries. It did build agricultural co-ops, help build them. It did build electrification, started to develop electrification of the country. It started to build housing, public housing, things like that. So it was product of that. So then, but like everything else, Ireland, the Irish economy reached the point where you had a large number of state companies which were employing thousands and thousands of workers. I'm sure you, like your friends now, I'm sure you've got these noodles where you just add your water to it, and you've also your packets of soup, you just put it in the pot and you add water to it. That technology was actually developed in Ireland by a company called Earn Foods. And Earn Foods was set up by the Irish state, was to develop spin-off industries from agriculture. So they developed drying technology for making dried food. That technology then was, by skullduggery, was sold, taken from that state company and given to Heinz International. So it's Heinz International and Cumulus. So Heinz International got their hands on that technology. That technology was developed by the Irish state, funded by the Irish state, financed by the Irish state. But so the Irish state then reached the point in the mid 50s or 60s where if the Irish state was going to create more jobs, because there was millions, like 1.5 million people immigrated from this country, from the south of Ireland, since the foundation of the state in 1922-23. 1.5 million people have left through immigration. They've gone all over the world looking for work, looking for a place to put down some roots, to find a place where they could find work, get shelter, raise their kids, because they knew that there was nothing happening here. So the Irish state itself had reached the point where it was to go further, develop further, to create more jobs. It would basically then become a challenge to private capital. So the Irish state did, and also in alliance with the United States, and the whole question of the dispensing of the war profits under the Marshall Plan, which were all the war profits, the dispense of that. The Irish state then, the state itself, Public Civil Service, went to the United States, and then they come back with a policy of turning Ireland into a platform for transnational capital. So from the late 50s onwards, 60s onwards, the Irish state has become a platform for particularly transnational US capital, and then providing a base into Europe. And that
we see how capitalism with Irish characteristics evolved, where you have companies like Google and Microsoft who set up a shop and basically live a very nice tax-free life.
Irish capitalism is parasitic. Its material base is very small. It arrived in the historical stage too late, because capitalism had transformed into monopoly capital. That was one of the products, one of the policies of British colonialism, was to prevent the accumulation of Irish capital, preventing the emergence of a capitalist class as a strong factor in the life. So you had always had a dependent capitalist class right up from the 18th century onwards. It was always dependent, north and south, on its links with Imperial Britain. And the same thing happened in the 60s. And now what we would define it as, the Irish people are under what we call the triple lock of imperialism. The Irish people are now controlled and dominated by US imperialism, by the European Union, by British imperialism. And they control the destiny of the Irish people. No matter what we do, what we say, they will decide. They will decide. So therefore, we see the struggle today is about the struggle for national democratic struggle.
Brief, and then before we talk about the cost of education and the rise of the Celtic Tigers, the very first banksters, if you will, talk about how sadly, Ireland, which has a rich history of revolutionary Irish women at the front lines against British imperialism and wanting a better world, how sadly, because as you mentioned, the British got their preferred people in Ireland, Fine Gael and the Catholic reactionaries who are very patriarchal. So talk about how sadly, when Ireland became a republic, the rise of extreme patriarchy, and then that of course that leads to the Mary Magdalene Aslims.
Well, these are all these are all connected into history. That the rise and power of the Catholic Church began to become an institutionalized power in 1850s, 1860s, and then and gradually built that power. So whenever the Free State was established in 1922-23, it was a state which was challenged by a large section of the population actually disagreed with the state, disagreed with the nature of the state, disagreed with partition. Uh, the ruling class itself was very, very weak, ideologically, and also despised because its material base was effectively was the capitalist
Working
class.
class, the working class, you mean?
Yeah, yeah. So the material base of the Free State itself was big farmers and the capitalist class, which of themselves are small, which are small. The vast bulk of the population, the working class and small farmers and the rural workers, didn't had a lot of opposition to the state. So what they did do, what the ruling class did, was they instituted a reign of Catholic authoritarianism. They put the Catholic Church in charge of health. They put the Catholic Church in charge of education. They put the church in charge of many, many things. They controlled communities all over the place. And so anybody who wanted a job as a teacher, if you had a radical view, you wouldn't get a job. People who wanted a job in the state or teachers had to swear an oath of allegiance to the British state, but also an oath of allegiance to the Free State, which was then. So you had two oaths of allegiance that people would be forced to swear: an oath of allegiance to the British state and an oath of allegiance to the Free State. And
So was there a lot? Was there a lot of so when Ireland became a republic, was there already at the very beginning a lot of Red Scare, anti-communism,
absolutely,
fundamentalism,
it
and
was cornerstone to it. It was anti-communism because whenever the Bolshevik Revolution took place, there was tens of thousands of people marched in Dublin to celebrate the Bolshevik Revolution. Also, during the War of Independence, there were hundreds and hundreds of factories were occupied by workers. Soviets were set up in different towns and cities, set up their own money, food distribution. So the Russian Revolution had a huge impact on people. I'd say what was missing was a revolutionary party. Connelly, with the execution of James Connelly, that understanding of the working class needing a revolutionary party to advance its interests was lost. And that led to the situation where James Connelly's son, Roddy Connelly, and others who were involved in the 1916 Rising, who were involved in Connelly's Socialist Party, split from the Socialist Party and founded the first Communist Party in 1921 to build that revolutionary party of the working class. So whenever the whole thing about the role women played in that whole national independence struggle, they had won a place, as James Connelly was talked about, having the working class, the citizen army take involved in 1916. There was to win a place at the table, about where Ireland was going to go to. And the involvement of women in the national independence movement won them a place in the national struggle. But so therefore, if you don't want to, if you want to, brush aside women's demands, the demands that women want, so what do you do then? Basically, you have to sideline them, to remove them from the narrative, their role that was played in the national independence movement. You have to remove them from that narrative. And once you remove them from that narrative, then they become then basically passive. And that's what they wanted. They wanted women, those revolutionary women, they wanted them to go back to being passive citizens, to be basically people who reared children, and looked after the man. That's what they wanted to. That was what the Catholic teachings, Orthodox Catholic teachings applied to. So in order to achieve that, if you want to drive women out, if you're driving out the whole demands of, Ireland was one of the first countries to grant universal suffrage. That was before anybody else. So you had all those. That was the pressure from the women's suffragette movement, equality and opportunity and everything else to do things. So if you wanted to stop that, because equality is always a dangerous topic. It's always a dangerous topic because equality doesn't stop between equality between men and women. That tends to get out of hand, and people start talking about, well, what about equality between people of color, and what about people who just basically
or the Irish Roma community, the Irish Cincy traveler community,
yeah.
and of course the queer
equality is a very dangerous commodity under capitalism. While capitalism gives you a very perception that everybody's equal, it's dangerous talk. That is dangerous talk because
capitalism. I'm not a fan. Capitalism. I'm not a fan of George Orwell anymore. But I do love the famous quotes in Animal Farm. Yeah, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. I mean,
I
that's
think it's a
capitalism
party.
in a
I think
nutshell.
again, capitalism, yes, it is. And if you look at it, that capitalism, how to say, it presents itself as being the vehicle for equality, the vehicle for advancement, the vehicle for everything. And it's a reflection. How do you know an ideology has become hegemonic when it's perceived to be common sense? So everybody believes that capitalism just makes common sense. It's a reflection of its hegemonic domination and control. So De-Valera said the driving of women out was an essential part of the counter-revolution. It was an essential part of it. It was to drive women back. It was to drive working class forces back. The Catholic Church was used as an important weapon to attack radical Republicans, to attack the communists, right from the 20s, 30s, right up on through. It was because it controlled the schools. If you can, as the Jesuits would say, give me a child at 7 and we'll have him for life. And the Catholic Church knew that if you can control the schools, therefore you can control how people will understand tomorrow. So history is not about yesterday, history is about tomorrow. And so therefore, if you can control how people see tomorrow, then you can control them. And so about controlling women was about important because that basically was to drive a sense of equality, any sense of radicalism out of the population. And so it's taken nearly 6, 7 decades of long, persistent struggle. It wasn't given to by the establishment. Didn't bring about divorce. The establishment didn't bring about contraception. The establishment didn't bring about a marriage equality. It was long and a hard struggle by people. Long, hard struggle where it became impossible for them not to allow divorce. It became impossible for them not to allow contraception. Up until the late 60s, early 70s, if a woman who was employed in the civil service or a teacher, if she once she got married, she had to resign her job. That was right up until the late 60s, and that basically was when it was removed from the law, it was because of a victory by trade unions who had organised and fought against it. So there's nothing, all the changes we hear about Ireland, and while Leo Varadkar can stand swan around Washington and spoof around that how modern Ireland is, it is not because actions of them, it's because the actions of people have said the chains that control us, we no longer wish to wear them. We
Yeah.
no longer wish to wear them. And that's through their own experience. So Varadkar and Emmons and Micheál Martin can prance around the world and pretend how liberal democracy we are. When it suited them, reaction, like after the defeat of the Republican Revolutionary Forces in 1922-23, it suited them to institute a reign of conservative reactionary Catholicism. In the 1990s, 2000s, reactionary Catholicism no longer suits them.
No longer suited.
We are a liberal bourgeois democracy. Therefore, we are all liberals. We're all liberals. So it doesn't suit them now. So, but if tomorrow, if reaction suited them, reaction would be reinstituted. No bother to them. So they are very flexible in what they perceive to be what democracy is and what is a liberalism is. And so we've got situations of women of themselves over many decades. And it has to be said, it's the impact of the Soviet Union and the advances made by women in Eastern Europe has had a huge impact. People knew about equality. People knew about it. The Communist Party was the first
Yeah,
organization.
in fact, I was pleasantly surprised when I was learning about the history of feminism in Poland and Romania. Before World War II, and then during the communist era. Now, I was very surprised to find out that Irish women, Danish women, and so forth would go to Poland Poland just to terminate an unwanted pregnancy.
Yes, and that is where in Ireland, like the first International Women's Day was organised by the Communist Party way back in the late 60s, early 70s. It took a long time, but these are the battles you have to have. Change is you have to try to create the tipping points of history, and I think I am hopeful, and I do believe if nature doesn't put the kibosh in the whole lot with the global environmental crisis, I think we are at a tipping point. I think the world is we are facing a very stark reality of the global environmental crisis facing us. It's not a product of human greed. It's a product of the absolute avarice and destructive nature of monopoly capitalism. It will do anything, it will go anywhere, it will settle everywhere, it will organize to extract the maximum profit either from the human beings or from nature. And I think we've reached the point where we are at a turning tipping point. Unless we're able to defeat monopoly capital, imperialism, we are on the cusp of a massive environmental disaster. And
And then two very quick questions, but before we wrap this conversation up, then, which is talk to us, as a communist, explains, talk to us about the rise of the Celtic Tigers, the banksters, the dodgy banksters. Talk to us about the rise of that, and what do you think should be the communist solution to those to those banks. And then I was going to ask you a question about the cost of education, but we're going to save that for another for another episode. So talk to us about how Ireland, like Britain and the United States, the bank, talk to us about the banksters.
We like Ireland, everything else, the Celtic Tiger was a product of the laissez-faire capitalism. It was also the strategy of Reagan and Thatcher, because they also didn't dream up these things. They reacted to the demands of capital. The Chicago Boys School in its application in Chile, they were applying what needed to be done for the interest of capital, not in the interest of the people. And all these actions of either, some people call it Reaganomics or Thatcherism and all this. They're not. They're just basically
or Rogernomics if it's PLNs, or
basically they needed
economics.
So they needed to. They responded to what monopoly capitalism needed at that particular moment in time. The historical compromise had capitalism was in deep trouble, and therefore it needed to create new avenues for capital accumulation, capital speculation. And so the only way to do that, because they colonized the world is now was dominated by monopoly capital. And therefore, there's no new planets to exploit, no new planets to explore, no new planets to dominate. And what they did do was that saw that the state had control over sections of the economy which they believed that the state should should not be in, and that private capital should move into these areas, because the state had built the infrastructure for a market in health and a market in education. So they created these conditions. So all they did was basically say, well, the state should now pull out of these things and allow the market to decide all these things: health services, education, housing. And so what happened in Ireland, they just basically applied that very, very
reactionary
ideology in a very, very open way. So all then basically housing became a third of the housing stock was built. 40% of the housing stock was built within about 10 years. So you had the stopped openly, totally no public housing, just basically speculative housing was built. So vast amount of money. The Irish capitalist class through the banking system was just to a degree a giant Ponzi scheme they built. They were borrowing money off German banks because of the application of this laissez-faire capitalism. The German Länder banks, which are basically countries bigger than some countries, or more powerful than some countries, they had money, or they wanted to borrow money, or they had money to speculate with. Irish banks were basically, and property speculators were borrowing money off the international banking system on short-term loan, long-term investment. Hopefully, they're hoping then basically was that because property prices were rising so fast that they could flip them. They could flip the housing property market, pay back the debt, and then move on to the next flip.
And they were engaging in predatory loans, and they were duping their clients. They
were borrowing money off. Some of them were borrowing money off the same properties 3 or 4 times. So then also not alone that, but they invested money in Ireland, but also they were borrowing money, shipping it through German banks and British banks and French banks and all that. We're actually using Irish banks as conduits for global financial speculation. So you ended up with basically Irish banks being involved in property speculation in Beijing, right across the world, Thailand, India, the whole lot. And so when as the proverbials say, when the shit hit the fan, when Burnings Bank and all those collapsed, the Irish banks, because we don't control the money supply, we are part of the euro, therefore the euro is controlled by the Germans. So then the European Union said there was a whole demand. We prefer the demand that let the banks go to the wall, set up a public bank, let the banks go to the wall. It's only money owed by speculators. We don't own it. We're not taking responsibility for that debt. It wasn't our debt. It was speculators who basically they live. If you're going to play capitalist rules, then you live by the sword or you die by the sword. So if capitalism went tits up, then you die by it. That's the chance you take. That's the gamble of capitalism. But no, they said no. The state has a responsibility to bail out these banks, because the European Union said if you let the Irish banks go, then the German banks will collapse. The French sections of the French banking industry will collapse, and part of the London banking industry will collapse. And so that is why. And the famous quote from, I can't remember the name of the person now, the European Commission. He said that the Irish government lets the banks go, a bomb will go off in Dublin, and not a physical bomb, but in other words, if you do that, a whole house of cards of Europe is going to come down around the whole lot of us. So therefore,
and since then, the shock doctrine and endless austerity has been inflicted on Ireland. Even though, according to what you're saying, the European Union more or less did not discourage this dodgy
behavior. They encouraged it. And then Ireland, when the government took responsibility, the Irish government took responsibility for 62% of European debt. So the population of Ireland, which is the Republic of Ireland, which is about 5 million, took responsibility for 62% of European debt. Ireland, if you put Ireland together, it's probably half the size of Berlin, half the size of London, half the size of Paris. In other words, a significant city in Germany would have the same population of Ireland. So it'd be asking something like Frankfurt or Bonn to take responsibility for the whole of European debt. That's how ludicrous it become. That's why the imposition of savage austerity. Whenever the gangsters from the IMF and the World Bank and the EU arrived in town, they came with what they call a restructuring program. That meant huge wholesale sell-off of public companies, wholesale attacks upon workers' wages and terms and conditions, right across the board. So it was a savage imposition of austerity that led in reaction to a degree that began at the beginning of the end of the decline of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and you could say the emergence of Sinn Féin as a potential government in waiting. So these are all part and parcel of it. Then the government has, because it's been completely wedded to monopoly capitalism and transnational corporations, then the government then basically opened up Ireland. Ireland is basically a platform for international globally traded services and goods. It doesn't manufacture much. It used to manufacture Viagra and various other things like that. So the pharmaceutical industry is big here. But and like everything else, we have a pharmaceutical industry, but we couldn't get a vaccine. We weren't allowed to develop a vaccine for COVID. But so there have all these massive profits being shipped out. So what they have so a lot of the monopolies of what they do declare, what we would call imperial rent. The Irish government will allow them to set up a fictitious head office here. They can declare their global some of their global profits, but also their royalties through the Irish through the Irish taxation system. So they wash it through the Irish taxation system. It comes out the far end. Then the big monopolies, big American monopolies, can say, "Well, we paid our taxes now, and our money's legit." Well, most of it's gone over to the Cayman Islands or wherever else they ship it to, and so basically it's become natural. So the Irish government said, "Well, this year they got 10 billion extra in the public coffers from taxes paid by transnational capital." So essentially, what we have is we're charging imperial rent. You can set up a headquarters here. You can exploit the rest of the world. Send your profits through Dublin. Have a wee office down the docks with a brass plate on it saying Eugene McCartan Incorporated. And you knock on the door and there's nobody there, but there's a door there with a plate on it, and it's registered in the tax office as being, this is where we are. This is our headquarters. So then you can wash all your money through the Irish taxation system. The Irish government said, we'll cream off this lot, you can have the rest. And so now so the Irish government has built an economy, it's built a budget. It's built a budget on speculative earnings. So 10 billion or more is money which can disappear tomorrow. So if you have built an economy of spending on money that has no material base, there's no real material base, can disappear tomorrow like snow off a ditch, then you're building a very, very precarious economic system. You're building a very, very precarious budgetary system. And
then second to last question I have to ask then: what's the communist? What would be the Irish communist solution to the private banking industry and all their?
At the time we still believe it. There is a need for a democratic. If you want to bring about social change, you need to control capital. You need to. The people must divide.
And leaving the European and for you, leaving the European Union
would be part of it. Would be part of it. And insofar as if the European Union allowed us to democratically control capital, sure, and then it wouldn't be the European Union. So same way, if we allowed democratic control of capital, it wouldn't be capitalism. So you have to. So you have to have a. So you need to invest if you want to start reprioritizing economic and social development. Therefore, you must have democratic control of capital. You must say where that capital is going to be invested. What are the priorities of it? Capital on the capitalism is invested where there's return on profit. Socialism is about where capital is invested for the greatest social return, where the great benefit of the great majority. So that would be investment in housing, education, cultural facilities, all those type of, and developing a scientific and developed economy which is orientated towards the people, not orientated towards the needs of global corporations or speculators on Wall Street or London or anything like that. It's not about returning a dividend to the speculators, to the owners of shares. It's about returning a dividend to the people in the form of better services, better quality of life, and all those type of things. So therefore, we would say you need to have a democratically owned public company, public bank. You need to have control over capital.
Yeah.
You need to have, in order to overcome the anarchy of capitalism, because capitalism will only invest. Capitalism would sell ice cream to everybody if there's a return in it, but there's not a return in it for everybody. So therefore, you have to say, well, we have to prioritize what development we need. Therefore, you need to have an economic vehicle to ensure even economic development across the whole country, because Ireland now is lopsided. Most of the industrial developments taking place on the East Coast, and the West Coast and rural areas are all being neglected. So you need to have a vehicle to develop the economy in a way that develops it right across the board. In other words, to end the uneven development and create more even development right across the country, north and south. So you need to have a corporation or a body that can do that. And the only way you can do that is by doing it by the state itself.
Public banking.
Yeah, public banking.
So public banking, nationalize the banks, and get rid of the profit motive.
Yeah, and then basically set up a body which would then begin about the developing industries which are suitable to material conditions and in alignment with nature and with the environment. So therefore we would call it a transformative strategy, a strategy which basically shifts the balance of power from capital to labour. So we live in a society where the balance of power rests with capital and the owners of capital. Therefore, if we want to create a more democratic society, we have to shift that balance of power away from capital and the owners of capital, but to the labour, and the producers of capital is labour. So therefore, from a more democratic society, it can only be done on the basis of socialism, because otherwise it's done. If it's not socialism, if it's capitalism, then that's about the enrichment and advancement of the minority. Therefore, it's not democratic. If it only benefits a minority, it can't be democratic. So we have to. So these are the arguments that the left needs to be tried to develop. That how do we understand how people acquiesce in their own exploitation?
Yeah.
So these are the questions that we'll be asking. I'll try to understand how do people acquiesce in their own exploitation? And once you start addressing the questions like that, then answers will flow from that. And the problem with the left, I think, the left of all the answers, but are not necessarily the answers to the questions that the people have in their heads. So how do we listen to the people? Not to say, well, this is what the people want, and therefore we'll go that way. That would be social democracy. Listen to the people, find out where the contradictions between what the people are aspiring to and what the ruling class are offering and what the system is offering. To look within that, the contradictions there, to bring our struggle to them. Because we are at the moment, how the left operates now is that struggles, many balls are thrown onto the pitch by the ruling class. And the working class and working class activists, left activists, are running around trying to kick this ball, get that ball, that ball. But when do we ever bring the struggle to them? How do we understand capitalism? Do we understand capitalism better than they understand us? How do we bring our forces marshaled against the citadel? Do we understand the citadel? How is it? Where is its strong points and where's its weak points? Are we assaulting it from at its strongest point, or can we mobilize our forces to its weakest point? Can we prise open the cracks within the system? Can we prise them open? Because once you've made people have prized something open, they've made it advance. Advance gives you strength, gives you political courage, gives you a sense of your own belief of what you can do. And that's what we need to be doing. And that's what we need to give people the political strength, the political conviction to radicalize the people. And social change is not brought about by a minority or by a party on its own. Social change is brought about the radicalization by radical people.
And that's a perfect place to end. But before we end, we usually end the program doing the questionnaire that was done by Marcel Proust, later the French broadcaster Bernard Pivot, and then my hero, the late James Lipton of Inside the Actors Studio. Eugene, it's your turn to do this, so let's do it. So, Eugene, what is your favorite word?
Favorite word? Nothing's impossible. That's 2 words or 3 words.
What is your least favorite word or phrase?
Can't do that.
What is your what turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
The richness of the human experience expressed through novels or poetry or song.
And what turns you off?
The ruling class telling us that the working class must be happy with its lot. And those apologists for it who say, well, yeah, as James Connelly put it, our demands most modest are, we only want the earth.
What sound or noise do you love, followed by what sound or noise do you hate?
What type of noise?
Yeah, what sound or noise do you love, and then what sound or noise do you dislike?
Oh, I don't really know. I haven't thought about it.
Piece of music, children laughing, or
all of that. Yes, anything that's human. Anything that's human is not an alien. It's not alien. But I say that the good things that impact upon us and the bad things that impact upon us are all the product of human activity.
Yeah.
So the things that the poverty and everything else we experience is because of human activity. The greatness of music and poetry and the good things of solidarity and people coming, the neighbor coming in the door and bringing in some food or just come in for bringing a conversation in the door. That's extremely important. Extremely important. So that noise, that human noise of solidarity, is absolutely critical.
And I'm going to assume that, and I'm going to assume that the sound or noise you dislike is center right to liberal to right wing media, and they're
people who tell you that basically who sow division, who sow confusion, and who basically try to turn people against each other because of little particular things they think they can use to divide and rule. And the life's experience teaches us unity is our only strength. And the old saying goes, united we stand, or divided we take a hiding. And at this moment in time, we're divided and we're taking an awful bloody hiding.
What's your favorite curse word then?
Oh, you couldn't say that in public.
Is that the F word? Is it the notorious C word, which is quite popular in England and Ireland? Or
I suppose the swear word they say here in Ireland is gobshite.
That's a great one. What profession, if you weren't the general secretary of the Communist Party of Ireland, what profession would you love to do?
Well, before I became general secretary, I worked in factories. I was called a tool maker. I used to make industrial tools, not hammers and chisels, but injection molds and things like that. So I like working with my hands. Anything to do with
Okay.
my hands.
It's like an artist, pottery and stuff like that.
Well, some of my family be artistic and some of my family are not. In one way or another, they all build and construct things. So you can call it art with a paintbrush or art with a shovel and trowel.
And what profession would you and what profession would you absolutely not want to do under any circumstances?
What would I not like to be? A lawyer.
Okay. And final one. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates? Or whatever is your vision of an afterlife.
My vision of an afterlife. I suppose the infamous is that they say to at least you made an effort to leave a better life behind.
Well, we were joined on this edition of 1+1, our all things Ireland special with Eugene McCartan, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Ireland. And folks, you're in luck. This is me and Eugene. We're already going to be working on another interview where we talk more about Irish domestic affairs and Ireland's real role in the world. But until then, Eugene, thank you so much for taking the time off of your afternoon to come here, and thank you so much for this. This is a great conversation, and I look forward to having you back on. And you tell any member of your party that if they want to come on to discuss anything and everything, they do have a friend at Youri Smouter.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care now. Stay safe.
Ciao. Yeah. Ciao till then.